sorry, I start recording with the introduction. But David, thank you so much for accepting being our guest speaker today. I'll let you introduce yourself and your topic to the group.
All right. Thank you so much, Elena. I recognize a few familiar faces here, and others I don't know you. Hopefully, I'll get to know you over time. My name is David Bell. I'm a long-term coach, trainer, facilitator, and today I was asked to speak on a topic. Does anybody know what that topic is? I'm spotlighted. The topic is, I'll share this with you. Connecting with your ideal audience through public speaking. So why might they ask me to speak on this topic? Of all the topics that I could speak on, why this one? Well, I'll tell you, I think somebody knew a secret is I've been practicing this topic for about 30 years. That's a long time to be practicing. And as I practiced that about 30 years ago, I started out as a financial advisor, and I worked with other financial advisors, trained financial advisors, managed financial advisors. But very early on, I was asked to stand in front of a group and talk about financial product. Does anybody know what it's like to stand in front of a group and talk about fixed annuities? It's pretty boring. As a matter of fact, I was standing in front of them, and I noticed people kind of falling asleep, and I'm like, oh man, I got to do something about this. And so what I did was I went and joined a group called Toastmasters International. And this was in 1989, I believe. And that was a really good decision because all of a sudden I was forced to speak in front of people, and I would get feedback every single time I spoke. And so I liked that combination. And over time, I continued to work on it. About a year after joining, I gave a speech, and I had somebody, a mentor, who encouraged me. They said, David, that's a really good speech. You should compete with that. And I'm like, compete? What do you mean? Well, Toastmasters has competitions. They do it, start at the club level of a Toastmasters group. And generally, it's in January, and they will have a contest. And so I'm like, well, that's a great idea. I'll just give my speech again in the contest. And so I gave my speech, and the speech was entitled Easy. And my first line of the speech was, how many of you consider yourselves easy? It probably wasn't the first best line to ask everybody, but I used the acronym at that point, and I gave my speech. And at the end of it, the contest judges judged. And guess what? I won the contest. They said, that's great, David. You get to go on to the next level, the area contest. Oh, there's an area contest? And so I went out and practiced a lot more for the next one. And then they said, oh, you won the area contest, you get to go to the next one, and then the next one. And I went all the way to second place in district for Toastmasters District 56 back in 1990. That's a long time ago. I know I'll take that as far as I can. And I've been a member of it for 25 years before I stepped into more leadership roles in Toastmasters. And now I'm more committed to developing other people and their public speaking skills and their leadership skills. That's what Toastmasters International does. So about a year ago, I'd been working for an organization, a bank. And actually, I started a Toastmasters club there about 8 years ago. And it's been doing very well. And after working for the bank for about 17 years, I left the bank. And I had already planned for my plan B. My plan B was I wanted to do coaching. And so I went through all the hoops. I'd already been doing coaching in the workplace for probably 25 years or so. We called it performance consultant. That's what they call it. Go out, we have this issue out here. We want you to go visit with the manager, see if you can help them get back on track. That was, it's kind of punitive coaching. It's not what I do today. And so about 7 or 8 years ago, I'm like, man, I think I need to get some certifications for this. So I'm a little bit more, have a little bit more credibility, not just the practice of doing it. And so after doing that, working in coaching, training, development for about 17 years at the bank, I was given an opportunity to practice my plan B, which was working for myself and doing coaching, facilitating, and speaking. So I'm off and running. I'm going out and I'm reaching out to all my LinkedIn contacts. Some of you on this call may have been one of those LinkedIn contacts. And I'm off and running, and I am out there doing the coaching thing. And the way I learned to coach was, how many of you have read The Prosperous Coach? Yeah, I'm a believer in it. I think it's a good approach, but I was like, man, I am doing hand-to-hand combat here. It's like I got to talk to a lot of people to get one client. And I just found it to be very challenging for me personally. And so for the first 8 or 9 months, since October of last year, I was focused on what I call hand-to-hand combat, reaching out to people I know, making a connection with them, having a conversation with them with the hope that we would develop that conversation into a collaboration, that I could be their coach. And I have to say that it didn't work for me. I mean, not the way that I thought it would. And but I'm not done with it yet. I'm still working on that approach because I think there's a lot of value there in building relationships. But making those calls, making those contacts, it may not have been a coaching opportunity, but what I got out of it were facilitation opportunities. I got speaking opportunities. I got other things. And so after about 9 months of hitting my head against the wall, I thought, I got to change this up a little bit. And so I went from, my business model was coaching, facilitating, and speaking. And I'm like, I've been doing this speaking thing for 30 years. Why am I putting that in my back pocket? And so I decided just to switch the model a little bit, to put myself out there as a speaker and then do facilitation when people are willing to pay for it, and then coaching. And my thought process here is that people can get a flavor of what I can do speaking, and they may hire me to facilitate a workshop, and when I do the workshop, they then get to know me even better, and they may feel more comfortable with the coaching opportunity because now they know me, they know my style. And obviously you think people in your LinkedIn network would know you, but what I found was organizations a lot of times are the ones who make those decisions to hire a coach, not necessarily always the individual unless they own their own business. So anyway, that was a big shift for me. And I'm not here, I'm speaking to you guys like, I know what I'm doing, but I'm not here to say I've got it all figured out. I'm just saying this is where I've been and this is where I'm going. And I can tell you there's some signs that it's working, and that I know that for myself, it brings me a lot of joy. So knowing that our topic now is public speaking, and I've spoken now for about 10 minutes, what would you like to get out of our session today? Just put it in the chat. What would you like to come away with on this topic of finding your audience through, or connecting with your audience through public speaking? Best way to learn how to speak? Okay, may have something for you there. How did you get your first speaking engagement? Oh, I love those questions. The aha moments you had along the way? Okay, that's good. I love that. Showcasing your specialty and getting engagements. All right. And for leadership development, what are the priority speaking topics? I like that. I especially like that one because that's the space that I like to play in. For leadership development, what topics? I'd like to learn about continuously finding speaking opportunities. That's something, Chang, that's something I would like to learn as well, how to find more opportunities. And I'm still working on that. How to determine how much to charge for engagements. How do you differentiate yourself from other speakers? Lots of good questions here. So my goal is to honor those. I didn't read them all off, but to try to get to some of those in the next 30 minutes that we have here. And then I'll open it up for some Q&A for you to ask me questions as well. So in sharing my story, I would share with you that I went from then to now, but then I would ask you to ask yourself some questions. And some of those are the same questions that you were putting in the chat. And these are questions, as a good coach, we want to start with what and how, right? So I just go through this process of asking myself questions. Who is my target audience? And I think for yourself, if you're wanting to use speaking as a tool to get in front of more people, that is the beauty of it. All of a sudden, instead of working with somebody one-on-one, I'm talking to them as a group. And there is something to say about being on the stage, because after I get off the stage, I notice that people come up to me and they want to talk to me. I don't get that when I'm just hanging out. Well, I do sometimes, but generally I don't get it as much as when I've been the speaker and they're like, oh, and usually the message is, oh, how did you start doing this? Or tell me more about this topic that you spoke about, or let's stay in touch. That's the one I like the most. Let's stay in touch. So I've been in financial services for over 30 years. So to me, that seemed like a natural bent, and I'm still working on that one because as natural as it seems, I made a critical mistake. So by the raise of hands, how many of you are still working for the organization? Do I see any hands? You see any hands? I see a few. So if you're still working for the organization, this may be helpful to you. If you're already out on your own and you didn't do this, you're going to be like what I did. But when I was in financial services, I spent all my time on my day job, focusing on the next training coming up, the next person I was going to meet with, doing the team meetings and all. I did not do a very good job of networking in the financial services community. And that's a hard lesson learned. I spent lots of time with my ICF coaches. Love you guys. I spent lots of time with my ATD Houston friends and family. I love those. Spent lots of time in Toastmasters, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time working the network in financial services. So if you're in a specific industry or working for a specific company, I really want to challenge you to get outside and meet other people who could help you longer term in your career. Sales leaders, I put this hyphen between there because I love sales. And that's where I spent a lot of my time in the training space is doing sales training. But I also love working with leaders, especially leaders who have just taken on a team and they're trying to figure it all out. They're overwhelmed by, taking on a team or taking on a division of the organization. So that's my audience. Professional organizations and associations, I'm here today at ICF Houston. I would consider that a professional association. Also, Toastmasters for me. I mean, the fact that I've been there for 30 years, some people think that's a big deal. I do have some initials after my name other than ACC. It's called DTM. And in the Toastmaster world, that's Distinguished Toastmaster. Less than 1% of all people who are Toastmasters have that Distinguished Toastmaster designation. All that means is I've done a lot of speaking. I've had a lot of practice, and I've also practiced my leadership. But these professional organizations, that's where I have found most of my opportunities so far. So for example, this last year, one of the first things I did when I made the switch is I'm like, okay, I'm going to reach out to District 55 in Toastmasters, which is where I started my Toastmasters journey in Austin. At the time, it was District 56, which is Houston. But I said, I want to give back to them. So I just reached out to them about 5 or 6 months before their conference. And I said, hey, I would love to be a breakout speaker or do something to support your team there in Toastmasters, especially around the idea of asking really good questions, around listening skills. Those are the topics that I tend having better conversations. And so when I reached out to them, I didn't know what to expect, but I reached out to them several months in advance. And that's one of the lessons learned is you got to reach out to these groups early on because they're planning ahead. And the fact that I reached out to them 5 or 6 months ahead of their conference probably put me like this, but they were just getting ready. They were just starting to plan. And so in that situation, they called me back and said, we want you to be our keynote speaker. And that was a big opportunity for me personally. I was like, whoa, that's that's my first outing and you're the keynotes. And we also want you to do a breakout topic. So I had lots of exposure at that District 55 conference, which is Austin, San Antonio, and the Valley. I would never have met those people had I not been able to have a chance. And they're people who come from all different occupations. So it's not financial services, but you got a variety of people who are trying to develop their skills or like us, they're wanting to improve themselves. And so these are some of the ones that I've done. But I would ask you to put down, who is your target audience? Who would you want to be in front of? Who would you want to influence? The next question I would ask you is, what are the topics that you can focus on? I believe that was one of the other questions that was asked. So the fact that I started out early career in sales, and then I went into management, and then I went into training development, I'm like, okay, and now coaching, right? I'm like, where's my sweet spot here? And it was somewhere between sales and leadership. And what I discovered was having better conversations. I learned this from coaching, is I learned that I had developed a lot of skills going through the coaching process about having better conversations. And so my first one was one that I've done for many years about building your network. It's about joining organizations of ICF Houston, ATD Houston, Toastmasters, and networking within those so that you know a few people in the audience. And so that's one of the topics that I talk on. Better conversations every day start with listening. That goes back to that active listening skill that we learn in our coaching competency. So I'm using my coaching skills, right, to introduce them. And by George, if I'm going to talk about better conversations, start with listening, I'm going to tell them I'm a certified coach. So now there's my free advertising that, here's something for you. Here's the practice listening skills. And I actually do a workshop where we practice our listening skills, and it's a lot of fun. I call it listening with our eyes, listening with our ears, and listening with our heart. And it's a fun topic for me. I get excited about it. And so that's the other thing about your topic. Find something that energizes you, because if you're energized, they're going to be energized. And so my goal is, I call myself the chief encouragement officer. My goal is to energize them, to encourage them, to give them something to look forward to. Third topic, I just take my coaching skills. These are two competencies: asking powerful questions and active listening. And I talk about those two skills and introduce them to the GROW model. I was introduced to it about 17 years ago. It changed my life. It changed the way I coached. I mean, I just remember putting the GROW model into effect, and it was useful for me for a long time. But giving the coach training, I've obviously developed a few more skills other than just the GROW model. So those are topics that come to me. I would say, what is your topic? It could be DEI, it could be health and fitness, it could be mental wellness, but pick your jam, so to speak, and find out what motivates you, excites you, and allows you a chance to get in front of others. If you find a topic that you're most comfortable with, then you're going to be most comfortable in front of your audience as well. So here's the big question as a speaker: how do you market yourself? So here's what I've done. One of the first tools, and I shared this with Elena earlier, is my speaker one sheet. And I went to a program through National Speakers Association probably 20 years ago that introduced me to the speaker one sheet. It wasn't until this last year that I actually did something about it. And so I went out to a few friends of mine that do speaking, and I found their speaker one sheet. And in a speaker one sheet, it has a little bio. It has your topics. I would limit the number of topics that you do. And then it has some testimonials, people who have experienced me. And then it's for more information, contact, and I give them my website, LinkedIn, and things like that. It's a pretty simple sheet to put together, but it's also challenging because you're like, well, I'm putting myself out there now, and this is who I am. And there's something about that's a little challenging for me personally. The other way that I found speaker opportunities, so the speaker one sheet, usually somebody who's hiring for a speaker, they'll ask you, oh, do you have some information on what your topics are? And this is what I send them, is the speaker one sheet. But the other thing I found out is you got to put in a lot of applications, like looking for a job. It's like you got to go through the whole, and this is like the worst part of using public speaking, is that, I'm constantly putting in an application. Here's my objectives. And so I've been on the other side of this. I saw Deborah Harris on the line earlier. She and I worked with Texas Coaches Coalition. It's a great organization here in Texas to select speakers for a 3-day conference that's held in March of each year. And so on the other side of that, we ask our speakers who want to be speakers, what's your topics, what's your objectives, what's a summary of what you're doing, give us your bio, give us an example of you speaking, a demo. I didn't put demo on here, but you really do need a demo of you speaking so that people can experience you. And so being on the other side of that has made me super sensitive to what I need to put in my applications. And so that's the application process. I think having your own answers already pre-done will help you get through a few more of those. So how do you get more speaking opportunities? Fill out more applications to be a speaker. Request for proposal. Some organizations, in the Texas Coaches Coalition is one of them. I think they just finished their call for speakers. Deborah could speak to that probably, but they have a call for speakers. They have a deadline. So you got to meet that deadline to put your name in the hat to be a speaker. And then I didn't put this on there either, but the referrals. I've had lots of people refer me because they know that I like to speak, and I put it on my social media pages. It's on my website. I post every now and then on Facebook and Instagram that I was at a speaking event or I was doing a workshop. And so people now know that David does speaking. Why don't you talk to him? So they know that I'm open for business. So those are some of my thoughts on marketing yourself. So what are the opportunities for speaking? So most of the opportunities, I have to admit, so far have come from my Toastmaster friends. And it's because I've been a part of that organization for a long time, and I have some people within that organization who know me very well. So I'll give you an example. I had a lady that she's a past international director of Toastmasters International here in Houston. And I told her that my goal last year was to speak in Texas at a Toastmasters conference, one of the district conferences. I said, but this year my goal is to go outside of Texas. Well, she goes, well, I'm working with Oklahoma right now, and their leadership team in the state of Oklahoma, and they have a meeting that's coming up. Why don't you reach out to them? So I reached out to them, told them that the past international director referred me, and they put me in for a 2-hour coaching workshop with all the leaders for Toastmasters International in the state of Oklahoma. I'm like, how do you get those kind of opportunities? So sometimes I go where the opportunity is, not necessarily where the money is. And the thought there is that it's your way of introducing people to your style, your approach, who you are. And then, of course, you want to lay down some opportunities to stay connected with them. Other opportunities are being the keynote speaker. That personally is not my goal. My goal, I'd rather do a breakout session. I'd rather it be a more intimate group and have a learning experience than just be the sage from the stage. Workshop facilitator, I've done a lot of that. As a matter of fact, I've had many opportunities to do that. I mentioned the one in Oklahoma. Panel discussion is a little new to me. I've done several of those. This last week, Chase Bank has a Toastmasters Club there. They know me. That's my people, they're, financial services. They asked me to be a panelist on their discussion about their Toastmasters. They had 31 people there, puts me in front of probably about 30 more people that I didn't know. And at the end, I always have a call to action. Here's how you can stay in touch. Here's how you can reach me. Here's some way that we can stay in. And then Master of Ceremonies, I have to share this story. This year was my 45-year class reunion, so you can do the math. And they had called me and said, hey, David, we know that you like to speak. Would you be our speaker for our 45-year class reunion? Guess what? I get there and I'm like, I'm here, and I was prepared to speak and all. And I get there and one of the organizers says, hey, I know you're our MC tonight. What do you have planned? I'm like, your MC? I said, I'm actually your speaker. Oh, I said, but I can help you with the MC if you need help with it. I said, what would success look like? And she told me. And so I became their Master of Ceremonies for our class reunion this year and their speaker. So you just never know where you're going to get the opportunities. But what I've learned is when you put yourself out there, the opportunities start to create themselves. This is a little bit different topic here. And somebody did ask a question about how do you organize it and all, and I will share that with you. But let's pause just a minute and see if we have any questions about how to market yourself or how to put yourself out there as a speaker. You're welcome to come offline. Elena can identify you, raise your hand, or just put the question in the...
Yeah, Kelly raised her hand. Kelly, you have a question for David.
So I have two, and you can decide if you want to answer both or just one, but the quick one is, how long should your demo video be?
Yeah, That's a good question. I typically do 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
Just don't think I have a longer version. So two groups I'm a part of, and I'll share it, was planning to share this with you later, is of course Toastmasters, but I've also this last year become a member of National Speakers Association, and I'm more focused right now on the Houston chapter because I can do more networking there. But I had an opportunity to compete in the storytelling. So anytime you get a chance to speak, take it. So I spoke in the storytelling contest. I didn't win first place, but I got second place. And as a part of being in the storytelling contest, they videotaped my story. And it was a very personal story for me. And I haven't shared it with a lot of people. It was about a childhood experience that I have. But I've done similar things to that. And what I've done is I've used Canva, and it'll allow you to edit the video and cut it down to like just a demo video of 2 to 3 minutes if you want to do that.
Can I ask you one more quick thing?
Sure.
How do you find the RFPs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I'm the best source for finding them. I'm just finding them. I stumble on them. Like somebody will say, somebody today, I was talking to a guy that's in HR, and he says, "Oh, are you part of the HR symposium?" And so that's a big conference that's held in Houston, Galveston area for those who are involved in. I mean, I think some of the folks on the call who are probably involved in that probably were speakers there. And I'm like, I didn't get the memo. And so you do have to network with people. That's where the NSA has been valuable to me and the other organizations that I'm a part of, is that I hear about these things and then I go, okay, I got to put that on my calendar. What I've learned, and this is in my lessons learned, is you've got to be looking out 6 to 12 months to get those kind of opportunities. And so now I know about it. And so it's just about presenting that. So I actually reached out to HR Houston, told them I was interested in speaking, and I anticipate at some point I will have an opportunity to speak with them, but we'll see. Does that help?
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, no other questions. I'll go
David,
back.
I have a
Oh, go ahead.
comment, more of a comment than a question.
All right.
I've just found, like, if you're kind of starting off speaking, the library, the public library is a great venue to, kind of use it as your playground for different topics and events. You can contact the local library and ask them if you can get on their mailing list for their patrons. It takes a few months to get that audience, which is vast. Or you can just, book the library conference room and arrange your own
Oh, I love
speaking
that.
engagement.
Yeah, if anybody has any other ideas like that, please share them because I'm taking notes here.
I'm sharing I'm going to share the link to a podcast called the Speaker Lab that is all about speakers and how you can find leads and all that. So I'm going to post the link in there. I follow that podcast religiously.
Yeah, that's great, Elaine. I didn't put this on my list, and I will update it to include podcasts, but I've had a couple of opportunities to do podcasts. I had one of my Toastmaster friends. She's actually over District 56 this year, and she was going to start a podcast. And she asked me, would you like to be my first guest? And I'm like, well, sure, why not? And so I did that one. And then a little while later, through the National Speakers Association, well, I didn't know it at the time, but I had a podcast reach out to me. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's the Culture podcast, Love in the Workplace. And they had written a book, they put it out there, and now they do a lot of development. They were at the ATD conference last year. And so they called me and asked me to be a guest on their podcast. And I spoke on the topic of better conversations start with listening. And obviously, I'm not doing a lot of listening right now. But anyway, so I was on their podcast and I asked him, I said, how did you find me? And he said, well, I went to the National Speakers Association and asked them, and your name came up and I knew that you were the one. So somebody from National Speakers Association, referred me, made the referral. And so letting people know you're speaking and that you're willing to speak is an important piece of the equation. So I'm going to share with you the how-to part. This is a workshop I've done for different groups over the years when they go, well, how do I develop my speaking skills? And it's a topic I call cracking the code in communication. I used AI today. They didn't like that name. They're like, this could be, and I'm not sure what that's all about, but I use the acronym CODE. And this is taught in Toastmasters as well. I don't necessarily think they refer to it as the code, but that was my acronym for it. And so it is all about your content. And I think for me, the content starts with your topic. What is your topic? What do you want to speak about? And what are the things? And I go through a process of using mind mapping to kind of develop my talks. And so my content starts with what do I want to talk about? And let's say the better conversations start with listening. And then I just brainstorm it with myself using a mind map. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is, I listen with my eyes, and then I started thinking about I listen with my ears, and I thought about my heart. And then I had to map all that out. Okay, so when I listen with my eyes, how do I listen with my eyes? Well, I'm looking at you, your facial expressions. If you're frowning right now, like Alina is, I know that. No, I'm just teasing Alina. But if you're smiling right now, like Alina is, so reading those facial expressions are important, right? And looking at the eye contact, are they looking at me? Are they looking away? And then the body gesture. So this format that we have here in the virtual format is not as good for body gesture because you can only see usually from here up, right? But in person, that's a big part. As a matter of fact, 55% of all communications is body language. And so when you lose that element, you've got to think of ways to have people relate to you with your body language. I use my hands a lot. That's I think it's an occupational hazard at this point. But those are key things. And then listening with their ears, I use some of the CCL, Center for Creative Leadership information there. And then listening with the heart is about intuition, impact, and intent. And so I just mapped all that out on a mind map, and then I start to layer it. And I start looking, that's where the organization comes. I go, how do I want to do this? What's my opening? What's my close? What are the 3 points I want to make? I always kid, I'm like, I'm going to give them 3 points in a prayer. That's some people may not appreciate that, but I grew up in church, and that's generally what I got every Sunday morning was 3 points in a prayer. And so that's the way I organize my topics is I will pick, here's my opening story. Here's the way I want to close. And then here are the 3 main points I want to get across. And then I layer it. I go, okay, these are the points. How can I support those? Either with a story, with a graphic, with a slide presentation. How can I support that? And then the delivery, this is where it all happens. It's like, I call it showtime. And there's something that happens with me. I think it's fear. But when you get me standing in front of, like today, I counted over 20 people earlier on the call. I'm like, okay, it's either fear, the butterflies are either going to fly everywhere or they're going to fly in formation. So my goal is to just focus that fear on what is my message? What am I trying to accomplish here? And I lose all the other things that are going on. A lot of new speakers, this is where they're challenged. They're so focused on what they're going to say that they forget their audience. And so if I were to give you one piece of advice on the delivery is always be thinking about your audience. What did they need? What did they want? How can you add value to them? And if you can come at it with that, then everything else, the slides, PowerPoint, props, we use props a lot in speaking. All those things are secondary. Audience is first. What is it that they want to hear? What is it that they need? And then I adapt myself with the things that so I mentioned 55% is body language. 38% of all communication is tone. Tone could be the sound of your voice, the pitch, the pace, the pauses. All of that's important when you're speaking because it creates some diversity in your language and how you're coming across. And then only 7% are the actual words that you're using, which is kind of interesting to me. But anyway, so in delivery, those are the 3 things that I constantly work on is making sure that I have good gestures, good body language, making sure that the tone is varied. And that's where I struggled early on. I would just, hello, my name is David Bell. I'm going to talk about fixed annuities, and the fixed annuities are this at this percent. Who wants to hear that? But adding stories, adding visuals, all that creates a little bit more. And then the effectiveness, really depends on what is your message. So am I trying to persuade somebody? So early career, I was about sales. I was trying to persuade somebody to become my client. Today, as a coach, I'm doing a little of that, but I'm more about how can I add value. So I'm trying to inspire, I'm trying to encourage. And if I can connect with somebody on that level, that's more my style. I don't consider myself a motivational speaker per se, but I do consider myself an inspirational speaker. And I do, more than today, generally like to tell stories, either things firsthand that I've experienced or learned from. And so the effectiveness depends on what are you trying to accomplish, and then did you accomplish it? Was it just information? Was it supposed to be funny? Was it supposed to inspire them, persuade them? What is your message and how effective were you? So if you want to learn more about how to perfect your skill, I would strongly encourage you to join a Toastmasters group for three reasons. One is it will give you practice time and you get feedback with that practice. Two is the repetition. A lot of Toastmasters group meet weekly. You don't have to give a speech every single week, but you do different roles where you're always speaking in front of the group. And the other is the people. I have made more incredible friends through Toastmasters than almost as many as ICF Houston. Actually, it's after 30 years, I've made a lot of contacts through Toastmasters. And I love the organization. I love what they stand for. National Speakers Association also has been helpful to me this last year because they're helping me to figure out how do I monetize this? How do I take the skill that I've spent 30 years developing and make money at it? Somebody asked for lessons learned. I've made a list for you. I don't want to read the whole list. I'll find some that really, so focus on a few topics. I mentioned that. Don't be shy. Let people know that you're a speaker. At first that's intimidating. It's like, I don't know if I want to let them know I'm a speaker because they may select me, and they will. Always, this is a big one. Always have a call to action. So especially if you're speaking, to put yourself in there as a facilitator, as a coach, follow up, or maybe your next session is another free webinar or something that's easy to say yes to. So you're giving them that repetition, a chance to get to know you. And the call to action in the last year, I've learned that that's probably my biggest lesson for the whole year is you always need a call to action, especially if you're speaking for free. Gives people a chance to experience you, look for the opportunities. I'll mention this, the demo video. That was something that kind of hit me blindsided. I had a close friend of mine, I was doing my outreach individual hand-to-hand combat calls. I worked with him 30 years ago in banking. We had a great conversation and he was like, well, how could I refer you? Because he already knew me and he goes, how can I refer you? Do you have a demo or something? And I'm like, that's a good question. I will have one for you in the next week. And so continuing to do the demos and maybe on different topics and exposing yourself to others through the demos, because especially if you're speaking at a conference like Texas Coaches Coalition, being on the other side of that, and I've done the same thing with ATD Houston. I've been on the speakers committee for ATD Houston conference, and I look for the video. I look for them in person. If they don't have it, that's a ding against them in my books, because if I can't see you operate, I'm about to put you in front of all of our members. I want it to be a good experience for them. And so I've kind of learned that from being on the other side. I'm going to stop. I'm going to open it up for questions.
You had a bullet on your last slide about use tools to make you look good. I was curious what that was about.
Oh, that is a good point. So the tools that make you look good, these are the ones that are not necessarily my strong points. So I sometimes have to ask for help. But one of them's Canva. Like this presentation you saw today, I did that on Canva. And I like the color and the way it comes up with the themes and all. It has the AI technology now. So a lot of the clip art that I use comes from AI. But the other thing I've learned is using your own photos. People want to see your own photos. As a matter of fact, we had a speaker at NSA that was a lawyer. For legal reasons, you want to use your own photos too, because it's easier to say, this is my content. This is my intellectual property. Another tool is the technology tools. Teladoc or Talkadot is one that I've learned recently, and it's a valuation tool. So if you give a talk, right as it, you can put the QR code on there, and it's a real quick survey tool. And a lot of speakers do this very well, where they take that tool, they do the survey, and then they publish it on social media. And especially if they've got 90% approval ratings, I mean, that's a winner to promote that. It tells people you're good at what you do, and they'll put specific comments. So that's another tool. Constant Contact, that's more of a mail tool, but in doing workshops and stuff, I use Constant Contact to communicate for upcoming things that I have going on. So using some of those technological tools to promote yourself. There's another one that was introduced to this year, and it's not coming, Loom. I'm not as familiar with Loom, but what I saw, I loved. But if you're trying to get a communication to somebody where they get a sample of you talking, you could do it on Loom and just email it to them immediately. It's a pretty cool tool. And I noticed Sherry put the Talkadot website. That's a great one. Anybody else have some ideas on technology or tools that you can use to kind of create awareness of your speaking or that you could use in doing public speaking? So the question, are most of your talks in person or via Zoom? I've had kind of a mixture of both. And so like today, Alina reached out to me and asked me if I would speak. And of course, I'm kind of going under this thing right now where I'd never turn down the opportunity to speak, right? And so it gives me an opportunity, but this is I probably have done more in person. So I was asked a couple of weeks ago to do a session with Toastmasters group at one of the clubs about mastering evaluations, which is really about giving feedback. How do you give feedback? So I was sharing them with my feedback using my eyes, my ears, and my heart. That's the way I give feedback. And so I had an opportunity to speak in person for that. So most of them, I would say, have been in person. A few of them have been virtually. And personally, I prefer the in-person, but I'm I think both. Are you seeing trends back towards in-person, or still doing? I think the opportunity is for bigger audiences is Zoom personally. I mean, during the pandemic, I was going through coach training with people from Europe, from Asia, from all over the world. And that's when I had the aha moment that if you really want to reach a bigger audience, Zoom allows you to do that. And that's the beauty of the technology. So I don't know. I go back and forth. I love being in person. In person does require travel. And so I've limited my geographic scope. And so that's something you may want to think about just for travel expenses, especially if I'm doing free talks. It's usually Texas and contiguous states or Zoom.
David, since you just mentioned free talks, there was a question earlier, and I'm curious to know, how do you price the talk? How can people, attach a fee to a presentation? Or is there any criteria you follow? What percentage do you do pro bono? Because we do a lot of free speaking versus, paid. Can you give us a little bit of your experience on fees?
Yeah, so this is a very personal topic, right? It's like it's like somebody asking you how much money you have in your checking account. It's none of your business. But I found that it's a big question and everybody has a different opinion on it. So one of my mentors, I've actually had a couple of people. One was from National Speaker Association, a guy that's been there, done that, written the book. And he saw my fees and he's like, you got to increase those. And my mentor also said, you need to increase those. So I was selling myself short. And so there's this dynamic that happens where you're putting yourself out there for a price that you're not comfortable with, and people can see that. So I think it is important to be comfortable with the price that you put out there for yourself. For me, it depends on what it is. So if it's a nonprofit organization, I'm more likely to be willing to do a free speech. I have had a nonprofit organization that reached out to me a few years ago to speak to their board of directors and do a workshop. And I said, here's my price. And I did say this, I I said, if you're not able to do this, I'm willing to work with you. And so don't let this be the only criteria of it, but this is what my price is to speak. Typically for, well, it depends on who you talk to. For me, it's probably a couple of $1,000s to give a keynote just for a 1 hour talk. For a half day, I generally charge about $5,000. And then for a full day, I get upwards around 6,500. So I really would, that's for a workshop or whatever. And those are the fees I've been charging. I have to tell you, people have paid those fees. So that's the encouraging part. But I don't have enough people paying those fees for me to feel 100% confident. So I will review that at the end of the year, and I may do an adjustment. The tendency, I think, for most of us is this, when we don't have mentors and coaches who are helping us along the way, our tendency may be to shortcut ourselves. And so, yes, I do free. I'm willing to do a lot of free. I also like benefits. If somebody says, well, if you speak, we'll do this, I'm open to bartering too. I haven't had a lot of that, but those are kind of, and that's probably sharing more than, that's the part, if you can remove that from the recording. But, I don't tell you that to brag. That's just where I've been coached and mentored to set my fees based on my experience in speaking.
Thank you, David.
Each person is different. And, if you want to charge $50 to give a 1-day workshop, that's, that's your deal. That's other questions.
David, thank you for this inspiring talk and being so open and vulnerable in your experiences. I really appreciate the code, how you broke that down, the content, organization, etc. To what extent do you allow the content and the organization of what you're going to say to be coming forth out of your intuition versus how strongly do you frame that ahead of time and you take in certain variables to define that?
Yeah. Well, I usually start with the content just because I want to pick a topic that I relate to. The funny thing about being in Toastmasters for 30 years, I have a drawer full of speeches that I've done for 30 years. So that's usually where I start, as I've already talked about a topic that I like. So for example, better conversations start with listening. I started out as a 5 to 7 minute speech in a Toastmasters meeting where I got evaluated, I got feedback, and I changed some things. And the organization part of that, I'm trying to think, the content stuck, I just expanded it. And so when I'm working with somebody for an hour, I turn it into an experiential opportunity. So I share with them the content, and typically it only takes about 15 minutes or 20 minutes at most. And then I flip it and I let them practice the content. And so the organization then changed a little bit. So right when I started, it was eyes, ears, and heart. And that's still, I gave a story at the front end about my daughter and how she really helped me to realize the importance of listening when she was a child and I was not listening. And at that moment, it was a big change for me. I'm like, I realized the importance of listening to other people, not only in coaching and business, but the people that we love. And so I start off with the story, I give the 3 points, and now my organization is I flip it and let them practice those skills. And I typically do it in pairs, let one try it, the other, and then they give each other feedback about what that experience was like for them. So I hope that answers your question. Does it, Chris?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
David, I just want to make another comment about Toastmasters and echo how impactful it can be. I was in the Middle East for 5.5 years, and when I first got to Saudi Arabia, the first thing I did was join the Toastmasters group, and just getting practice, building content was phenomenal through that group and getting that feedback. But I also got noticed for jobs. In fact, I got my first job in the Middle East through a Toastmasters speech, and someone really liked the content and my style of speaking and just said, hey, do you want to interview for this position? So it can really carry you far to be a part of this organization.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a great story. I will share, I mentioned earlier, always end with a call to action. Are you ready? All our coaches are ready for this one, aren't you? What do you think my call to action is?
practice.
Practice, that's a good one. So you can do that in a Toastmasters. That's a great opportunity. Or just putting yourself out there, like at the public libraries, like was mentioned earlier. Every time you see an opportunity, keep giving yourself. And I would say get somebody to evaluate you. Give them what you want them to look for when you're practicing. What else do you think the call to action might be? You see anything in the chat, Alina?
If you need coaching,
Yeah,
contact me.
I love that. That's a great call to action. What else do you think you could do a call to action on after a talk like this?
Jerry says, clarify your target audience.
Okay,
Mike says, step past the fear.
all right. Okay, step past the fear. That's a big one. That really is a big one. And that's the
Okay.
reason most people will join it.
Angie says, contact you.
So here's my call to action to you. And I want to do a free one for you. So I don't want to make money off my peeps, but if you have a speech or a presentation that you want to practice, I'm willing to listen to it. And I thought about doing this as a group, and I came back to, well, most people, that's their fear, is doing it with a group. And if you want to invite somebody else to do your presentation with you, I'm open to that as well. So you could share the invite. But between now and December the 20th, anybody who signs up on my calendar for a 30-minute session, you get a chance to practice a 10 to 12-minute presentation speech. And at the end of that, you'll get feedback. I usually like to start with a self-assessment, and then I'll share with you what my observations were. And so that's my call to action today for you. If that's something you're interested in, if you want to develop this further, that's my holiday gift to you. And the other call to action would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. So if we're not connected, I love my coaching people. These are my people. That's the way I think of it. These are my peeps, and I like hanging out with them. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'm available on LinkedIn, and would love to connect with you as well. All right, Alina, back to you.
David, thank you so much. We can see already in the comments how insightful, how helpful this presentation has been. You've not only shared, I don't know about you guys, but when I met David, he just exudes this beautiful aura around him. And I think you've been able to appreciate that today. He's really sharing from the heart, talking about communicating. I think everything that he shared with us has come from the heart more than from his mind. So we are so grateful, David, for sharing everything you share with us today and for that beautiful offer. I hope everyone takes advantage of that and definitely connect with David. Everybody, thank you. Thank you to the two members here that acknowledged that today is Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to any of our members here that might be veterans. If you're not in our WhatsApp group, feel free to email me, text me, whatever. I can add you to the WhatsApp group we have for the Coaches Launchpad, and I can post the QR code that David shared with us in there. The recording of this session will be published by the ICF Houston at some point, maybe in a week or so. If you don't get it, let me know and I have access to that. And otherwise, we will see you in in December. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And thank you for attending all the way to the end. I will put my email in the chat right now before I close the call. Thank you everyone for attending.
David, I think there was a
week.
request for a QR code again as well.
Yeah. David, you want to post, you want to share that QR code again? There it is. And my email address is in the comments. And I will stop the recording. David, if you can stay on the call for just a second, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.